Good evening. At 8 o'clock tonight, we're looking at the fiery Agnipath protests, which have actually worsened since the government announced a compromise that they would increase the up age limit to 23 for recruits. But just look at these pictures we can see. The pictures that we are looking at, which has so many protests across states, about 8 states now hitting protests and violence, arson and looting. Let's just break up because we have our reporters from each state reporting this. So let's just start with Bihar, UP and Telangana, where we saw the worst arson, violence and protests today. Today, the third day, was the worst day of Agnipath protests. At least 8 states hit. The day after the age limit is increased by the government and compromise, protests actually grow. From trains to buses, mobs destroy property. The main target is trains that are torched from Bihar to Telangana. 340 trains have been affected, 243 trains cancelled, says the Railway Ministry. Trains actually set on fire in 11 areas, multi-crore losses. The Railway Minister appeals, don't damage trains. The ex-army chief says we don't want people who burn buses and trains in the armed forces. 3 defence chiefs firefight protests with interviews and fact checks. In fact, the recruitment process is speeded up. The notification will happen in 2 days, says the Army Chief. The first Air Force recruitments will happen in a week, and the first batch of Agniveers will be ready by December. What is the impact on people? Look at these children stuck in a school bus in a Bihar blockade, weeping amid the protests. The protests just become vandalism in many states. Masked young men roam railway stations in Bihar with lathis. In Bihar, BJP leaders and homes and offices are targeted. The BJP blames the Nitish government for not doing enough. BJP spokesperson Nupur Sharma is untraceable, say Mumbai cops. They've been in Delhi for the last 5 days to give her a summons, but they can't find her. Meanwhile, Friday prayers are peaceful across Uttar Pradesh, Delhi, Jharkhand and other states. And a US Department spokesman condemns Nupur Sharma's remarks. 16 are dead in Assam in heavy rain, and the floods that followed as unprecedented rain leads to Assam devastation. Markets had their worst week in 2 years. The Sensex Nifty down over 5% from last week. And back to our top story, how cops saved a burning train and averted disaster. Our lead story tonight, protests against the new radical armed forces recruitment scheme introduced by the government spread to the south today, with protests turning into vandalism in many states. The government and ex-chiefs have come out strongly. Ex-chiefs have said we don't need people burning buses and trains in the armed forces. But despite protests, the government is determined to push ahead with Agnipath. In fact, the 3 service chiefs are all out giving interviews today and have said that recruitment will begin as soon as next week. But today, really, the big shocker has been the vandalism we've seen in many states, especially in Telangana. Uma now joins me live. Uma, what happened in Secunderabad? You're at the Secunderabad railway station when there's absolute mayhem, chaos and arson in the morning, and police firing as well.
Yes, indeed. Extremely scary situation here from about 8 to 9 a.m. in the morning. And violence, in fact, broke out around 10 o'clock. That's when, in fact, the bogie started getting being lit. And right behind me, what you see is, in fact, the Ajanta Express that was also set on fire. So for about 9 to 10 hours, all the protesters were sitting here. It started with them assembling here at about 9 a.m. and about 2,000 of them came here. And suddenly things were out of control. The security forces were very clearly outnumbered, and that's when the police decided to open fire, order fire, and one protester, a 19-year-old protester, in fact, was killed in that incident. But now things are beginning to look normal. Still the station is in fact eerily silent, I must say, but you can see the train movements, at least the engines begin to move. At least 75 trains were otherwise cancelled, but if you pan there, you will see on that bridge also people beginning to actually come into the station, because till now the visuals that they had been seeing on social media and on other regular television channels have been extremely scary, and people have been actually taken by shock and asking questions about how this could happen. in the middle of the city, and how things were allowed to actually slip into this kind of a situation. We bring you a report from what happened through the day and what led to this kind of mayhem, in fact, at Secunderabad station, something that has shocked not just the city residents but the country as well. By 9 a.m., an estimated 2,000 protesters had gathered at Secunderabad railway station, apparently mobilized through messages on social media, and attacked 3 passenger trains, burning down bogies, breaking property inside and outside on the platform. We are inside the AC coach of Shalimar Express. There were passengers inside. There was an attempt to break all the glasses and also set fire to this. People left their suitcases, all their saman inside, and in fact ran out. Thankfully, none of the passengers were harmed.
फेंकने लगे, आग लगाना चालू कर दिया। मुंह ढक करके नकाब पहन करके सब ये सब कर रहे थे। किसी का तो फोटो हमने नहीं ले पाया, हम तो पैसेंजर को बचाएंगे, फोटो ले मैम। उसके बाद ये देख रहे हैं आप, तेल का टैंकी सामने दिखाई पड़ रहा है। ये तेल ऐसा चीज है कि इसमें आग लग जाएगा पूरे गाड़ी में, ये देखिए ना।
To bring the situation under control, the security forces, who were clearly outnumbered, opened fire. 19-year-old Rajesh was killed. More than a dozen were injured. The protesters were still not deterred and continued sitting on the tracks. They said they were frustrated that in the last 2 years, exams were postponed 11 times and refused to move till exams were announced.
क्या कर सकते हैं मैडम, लास्ट टू जान भी ना हमारे पास कुछ नहीं है अब देने के लिए। अब दांतों पर कुछ लगा चुके हैं, हमारी जान भी 11 बार जब डेट गया तो हम क्या कर सकते हैं, अभी बोलिए।
At least 75 trains, including 65 MMTS trains, were cancelled. Several others were diverted.
इतना तंग किया, हल्ला किया तो बहुत डर लग रहा है। तो अभी ट्रेन भी नहीं मिल रहा है, जाना जरूरी था बहुत, तो अभी तो ट्रेन नहीं मिल रहा है।
We are inside the completely burnt bogie of Ajanta Express. Eyewitnesses tell us that those who attacked were carrying inflammable material, possibly chemicals. How that escaped the eyes of intelligence agencies that such big numbers came in armed with this kind of material is something that needs answers. At Secunderabad railway station with camera person Nagraju, Uma Sudhir, NDTV.
And just look at the impact of that multi-crore losses. Passengers who were in those trains, can you imagine the impact on them? And just look at these visuals coming from Bihar, where there was large-scale arson today, a toll plaza, BJP leaders' offices and homes, trains. And here children actually weeping as they're stuck inside a bus. This bus was stuck in protest in Bihar. Children trapped in the middle, don't know what's going on, but just caught in there in the middle. So really, the violence we're seeing, the trains, arson. Why exactly is Bihar such an epicenter of these protests? It's not a state which sends the most aspirants to the army, but it's really also an indicator of the huge unemployment crisis. Manish speaks to aspirants there on why the protests have now become sheer vandalism.
At Patna's Gandhi Maidan, where thousands of students every day, round the year, they practice not only for the army, but also for the other services like paramilitary or Bihar police. And we have some students. आप लोग आर्मी के लिए भी तैयारी करते हैं और अर्धसैनिक बलों के लिए भी। जी हाँ। ये बताइए कि ये जो नया केंद्र सरकार का स्कीम आया है, उसका इतना विरोध क्यों हो रहा है?
सर, जैसे मान लीजिए हम लोग 4 साल के लिए भर्ती के लिए जा रहे हैं, उन्होंने बोले हैं कि 4 साल में आपको हम अलग अलग कोर्स करवाएंगे, निकालने के बाद बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियों में डालेंगे। हम उससे एक बात पूछना चाहते हैं, अगर मान लीजिए बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियां हायर करती हुए तो स्किल के बेस पे, एक्सपीरियंस के बेसिस पे करते हैं। हम लोग डिफेंस में काम कर रहे हैं, गन चलाना जानेंगे, वहाँ पे कंपनी में कौन सा गन चलाने का काम हम लोग को देगा? सिक्योरिटी गार्ड का नौकरी करेंगे क्या हम लोग?
क्यों? यानी 2 साल के प्रधानमंत्री का चुनाव होना चाहिए सर। हाँ, तब ये बात सही है। 2 साल के लिए मात्र 2 साल के लिए चुनाव भी तो 2 साल के लिए होना चाहिए। जब आपने जो भर्तियां हैं जो 4 साल के लिए केवल कर दिया है, तो ये नेता लोग के चुनाव भी तो 4 साल के लिमिटेड होना चाहिए। ऐसा थोड़ी है कि आपका और उसमें से 15 में उठ गया भरोसा, उसमें से तो 15 में उठ गया भरोसा। जब बोला था 2 करोड़ नौकरी देंगे, तब ये भरोसा उठ गया उसमें से। 6 साल से बातें नहीं कुछ चल रहा है। मात्र 6 साल से हम दौड़ रहे हैं, मात्र 4 साल के लिए। सर, आर्मी एक मेरा माँ बाप हम पे भरोसा किया है कि मेरा बेटा आर्मी बन के आएगा,
हम गरीब घर से सर यहाँ पटना में आके पढ़ रहे हैं, तैयारी कर रहे हैं। हर सुबह गंगा नदी जाते हैं बाला में दौड़ने के लिए, मात्र 4 साल के लिए। ये 4 साल के बाद फिर क्या करेंगे सर? भीख मांगेंगे, विमान नदी के किनारे भीख मांगेंगे।
आर्मी एक सम्मानजनक पद होता है,
4 साल में
तब आर्मी बन के हम किसी का ड्यूटी करेंगे, सरकारी प्राइवेट ड्यूटी करेंगे।
अच्छा रैंक ऑफिसर हैं, उनको जितना वैल्यू मिलता है, जितना मेरे गांव में सिपाही को वैल्यू मिलता है, जितने रिस्पेक्ट से उन लोग से बात आदमी करते हैं, उन लोग हम लोग अंदर भावना में जाते हैं। ये नहीं कि किसी नेता के बेटा को आज तक गया फौज में, आज तक कोई शहीद हुआ नेता बेटा? राजनाथ सिंह जो बोल रहा है उस बेटा क्या कर रहा है? नेता का नेता बेटा नेता बन रहा है।
So the focus of what the aspirants are saying, the big issue is the tenure only for 4 years. This, even though the government made a major compromise by late night, actually saying that the age limit would be increased to 23 years. But in Bihar, the big worry remains that how these protests have become all about arson and looting, a toll plaza set on fire, stone pelting, trains torched. In fact, young men in masks are going to various stations and vandalizing public property, and the big focus of anger is also politicians. So BJP leaders are being targeted, and in fact they're hitting out, blaming both Lalu Prasad Yadav's RJD for the violence and also indicating that the Nitish Kumar government, which has asked for this Agniveer scheme to be re-looked at, isn't doing enough.
Target railway stations, toll plazas and the homes of BJP leaders. Protests against the new recruitment scheme Agnipath rapidly descending into open vandalism and chaos as hundreds of young men with sticks, masks and stones attacked all symbols of what they say is a decision that ruins their future prospects. In shocking visuals, bogies of trains completely burnt, from the Jammu Tawi Express at Motihari Nagar on the Hajipur-Baroni line and coaches of the Bihar Sampark Kranti Express burnt at Samastipur, as masked youth went on a rampage.
जब आपने जो भर्तियां हैं जो 4 साल के लिए केवल कर दिया है, तो ये नेता लोग के चुनाव भी तो 4 साल के लिमिटेड होना चाहिए।
Also in the firing line were BJP MLAs and workers. Security now increased at BJP offices across the state. The House of Bihar's Deputy Chief Minister Renu Devi of BJP legislature attacked.
देखिए, सबसे बड़ी बात है कि 4 साल की नौकरी और नेता में दोनों में अंतर होता है। नौकरी नहीं है, अभी भी मैं कह रही हूँ कि नौकरी नहीं है, ये ट्रेनिंग है, ये कौशल विकास की ट्रेनिंग है, ये सेना की कौशल विकास की ट्रेनिंग।
In a few hundred meters away in the same town of Betia, stones pelted at the residence of BJP MP and Bihar BJP chief Sanjay Jaiswal, even as the MP was inside his residence. Seeing the targeted attacks, security increased at BJP offices across the state.
जानबूझकर एक अफवाह फैलाई जा रही है कि युवाओं को अग्निवीर से कोई दिक्कत होने वाली है, जबकि यह बिल्कुल साफ है कि इसमें रेजिमेंटल सिस्टम खत्म नहीं होगा। 17 साल में जो बच्चे 12वीं पास नहीं किए होंगे, जब वह 4 साल उनका पूरा होगा तो उनको 12th का सर्टिफिकेट भी साथ में मिलेगा।
Ex-army chiefs strongly condemned this vandalism, saying youngsters like these don't belong in the armed forces. But the big question remains why Bihar has emerged as the epicenter for protests against the new scheme. The reason experts say is that it is one of the states in the country with the highest rate of unemployed young people, nearly 38 lakhs. Many who spent years preparing for government exams like the civil services, the armed forces and the railways. The rate of unemployment in Bihar at 14% is nearly double the national average. With Manish Kumar in Patna, in Jaipur, Harsha Kumari Singh, NDTV.
And the Railways Minister has appealed that there must be no damage to railway property. This, as the latest figures of the Railway Ministry show that 340 trains have been affected, 243 trains cancelled. So you can imagine the inconvenience to passengers and the multi-crore losses to the railways, which is all taxpayers' money.
मेरा निवेदन है सभी से, रेलवे आपकी संपत्ति है, राष्ट्र की संपत्ति है, इसको किसी भी तरीके से कोई नुकसान ना हो, ये हम सबकी जिम्मेदारी है। तो मेरा निवेदन है कि किसी भी तरह के वायलेंट प्रोटेस्ट न करें और रेलवे की संपत्ति को बिल्कुल भी नुकसान न करें। ये आपकी संपत्ति, आप ही की सेवा के लिए है।
And Telangana, Bihar and also Uttar Pradesh, where there was also widespread violence and arson across the state. So that being the big focus, also protests in the Prime Minister's constituency of Varanasi. This, as various UP BJP leaders are tweeting, saying that this is being done politically and that the youth are being misled.
violence across UP over the government's new Agnipath recruitment scheme. In Varanasi, Prime Minister Modi's Lok Sabha seat, a mob of 200 to 300 protesters descended on the Varanasi bus station early morning. And this was the result of an hour of mayhem.
Unfortunately, things have taken a violent turn in many districts of Uttar Pradesh, including in Varanasi where I am right now. Many buses and their window panes were smashed a while ago. You can see this bus here. This is an air-conditioned bus. It's called the Jan Rath and it is operated by the Uttar Pradesh government. Right now you can see that all window panes of this bus have been smashed. See, these are all electric buses, very expensive buses that have just been purchased by the UP government. See that even this bus smashed by the protesters. क्या हुआ
सर? ऐसा है कि सर बहुत से दंगाई करीब 200 से 300 संख्या में आए और इस गेट से सीधे वो एंट्री करते हुए आए और उन्होंने सीधे कहा कि पहले जो योगी ने लॉन्च किया है पहले उस पे टारगेट करो.
What has happened here is really and truly shocking. This is a newly brought electric bus. It's very expensive and the government has brought it across UP for intra-city commute. This bus has been totally smashed. You can see all of these window panes smashed using bricks. The remnants of that all over here.
700 kilometers away in Mathura, this man, his young child in his arms, ducking for cover behind cops. As a mob pelted stones on vehicles and the police and even commuters on the Delhi-Agra National Highway. In East UP's Ballia, this mob vandalized the town's railway station and set a train coach on fire. These visuals shot by journalists show a protester who appears to be seriously injured in police action being taken to hospital by the cops.
आज 100 उपद्रवियों को गिरफ्तार कर लिया गया है और सबको जो है जेल भेज करके उनके विरुद्ध जो सख्त से सख्त धाराएं लगा करके कड़ी कार्रवाई अमल में लाई जा रही है.
In West UP's Aligarh, buses and vehicles were torched and at least 2 policemen injured in the violence. But the police and the government spoke of reconciliation. A stand different from the action over last week's violence over Prophet Muhammad remarks, where homes of accused have been bulldozed.
जनपद के सभी अधिकारियों को निर्देशित किया गया है कि वो जिला सैनिक कल्याण बोर्ड और निर्वाचित जनप्रतिनिधियों जैसे कि ग्राम प्रधान, ब्लॉक प्रमुख, माननीय सांसद और विधायक गणों से संपर्क कर आम जनता को इस चीज़ों से अवगत कराएं ताकि जो बच्चे हैं उनके उज्जवल भविष्य के साथ कोई गड़बड़ी न होने पाए.
The police have been deployed across sensitive locations in Uttar Pradesh. With Karuna Sindhu, Saurabh Gautam, Adnan Khan, Ajay Singh and camera person Rajesh Gupta, this is Alok Pandey, NDTV.
So interestingly, it's not Telangana, Bihar or UP which send the highest number of young people to the armed forces. That's more states like Punjab and Haryana. So in Haryana, also the government is beefing up security. In fact, the internet has been cut in many districts and also ban against crowds of more than 4 people gathering in various Haryana districts, including in Gurugram bordering Delhi. But here's why the Haryana's aspirants, where remember that many of these are multi-generational armed forces families, are protesting so much. Even their parents saying a 4-year tenure in the armed forces is worth nothing.
Protests across Haryana against the centre's Agnipath scheme to recruit soldiers on a 4-year contract basis. Despite orders saying no gatherings above 4 people in Haryana districts like Gurugram, Mahendragarh and Ballabgarh and internet shutdowns in several areas, major stone pelting took place in Ballabgarh and demonstrations were held in Kurukshetra and Mahendragarh. Protests were also held in Rohtak, where an army aspirant, Sachin, died by suicide on Thursday.
Sachin hailed from Jind in Haryana and had already given the physical as well as medical examinations. But for the last 2 years, he had been waiting for the written examination to take place as the army had paused recruitments due to COVID.
Sachin hailed from Haryana's Jind and had already cleared the physical and medical exams. Sachin had been waiting for the written examination to take place for the last 2 years since the army paused recruitments due to COVID. While his father, who is a retired soldier, and police agree that he was an army aspirant, it is not known whether his decision was connected to the announcement of the Agnipath scheme.
परेशानी तो कोई नहीं, बिल्कुल कभी बात ही नहीं हुई परेशानी की तो है। और हमने तो पता भी नहीं, बच्चे बता रहे हैं बोले कल परसों ये कुछ होया है, बोला कानून बना है।
Today, Farmers Union leader Gurnam Singh Charuni led the Rohtak protests outside the BJP office, where army aspirants from across Haryana turned up. The main issue is the 4-year tenure for Agniveers with no pension or health benefits after their tenure ends. Among the protesters is 20-year-old Naveen Malik from Sonipat, who has been preparing for army recruitment by attending coaching in Rohtak. His father died more than a decade ago, and the only source of income is his grandfather's pension from the army since he retired as a soldier.
10 से 12,000 लग जाता मैडम, खाने पीने का सब कुछ मिला के पीजी में रहना। मैम सारी दिक्कत है, क्या दिक्कत नहीं मैम। 4 साल बाद आएगा फौजी, रिटायर हो गया, क्या करेगा 4 साल बाद आके यहाँ पे।
तो इसमें एक ऐसा क्या है कि मेरे पास बच्चे गरीब से गरीब परिवार के बच्चे आते हैं ना, जिनकी आमदन बिल्कुल जीरो होती है। 3-4 साल बच्चों ने फीस पे की, अब लास्ट जब एग्जाम तक पहुंचे तो सरकार ने फरमान जारी कर दिया जी कि इनका एग्जाम कैंसिल। 4 साल के बाद जवान को घर भेज दिया जाएगा। मान के चलो जी कि सीधी सी बात को उसका एक तरह का शूटर बना के घर भेज देंगे।
Haryana has always had soldierly traditions where several generations of the family serve in the armed forces, and a Fauji receives huge respect in Haryana's rural areas. But despite the centre's repeated assurances, many youngsters here feel disheartened with the scheme. With Mohammad Ghazali and Surinder in Rohtak with camera person Sanjay Kaushik, this is Sukirti Dwivedi for NDTV.
So today, on day 3 of the protests, have actually been the worst and most violent since the scheme was announced. The government is firefighting this. They announced the one-time upper age limit relaxation from 21 to 23 years. That didn't impact the protests. But what's important is that they're speeding up recruitment, with the service chiefs out today giving interviews saying that it will begin as early as next week, and recruitment notification begins just 2 days from now. The army chief has said that the first Agniveers, the first batch, will be ready by December.
यह वन टाइम रिलैक्सेशन दिया गया है। इससे बहुत सारे नौजवानों को अग्निवीर बनने की पात्रता स्वतः मिल जाएगी। और मैं यह भी कहना चाहता हूं कि भर्ती प्रक्रिया कुछ ही दिनों में प्रारंभ होने जा रही है। मैं सभी नौजवानों से अपील करता हूं कि सेना में भर्ती होने की वह तैयारी करें और इसका पूरा लाभ उठाएं।
सुधार होता है तो प्रतिपक्ष के लोग भ्रम फैलाकर जो है लोगों को गुमराह करने की कोशिश करते हैं।
अगली 2 दिन में ये अधिसूचना या नोटिफिकेशन joinindianarmy.nic.in पर ये घोषित किया जाएगा, और उसके पश्चात हमारे आर्मी रिक्रूटमेंट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हैं वो रजिस्ट्रेशन और रैली उसका शेड्यूल डिटेल में डिक्लेयर करेंगे।
A quick look at some other headlines. Well, suspended BJP spokesperson Nupur Sharma is untraceable, said the Mumbai police. This after cases have been filed against her in several states. The Mumbai police have been in Delhi for the last 5 days to issue a summons to her, but they say they can't find her and they haven't been able to do so far. This as Friday prayers today were peaceful after last week's violence that broke out across many states. Today it was peaceful. The US State Department spokesperson today also condemned statements made by the BJP spokespersons, the former BJP spokespersons, and said they were happy the BJP had taken action. Well, the worst week for the Indian markets in over 2 years. The Nifty and the Sensex declined over 5% from last Friday to this Friday. The Nifty falling 67 points, the Sensex falling 135 points. Experts say this week the markets have been hammered by rate hikes and inflation concerns. And devastating floods in the northeast after unprecedented rain. People have been killed across Assam and Meghalaya in the last 2 days. The rain red alert has been extended here in Assam and Meghalaya, with part of the national highway in Meghalaya collapsing and people being trapped in landslides and the heavy floods. Well, as we end tonight, today India was really shocked looking at the visuals we've seen of public property, trains, buses all being damaged. But let's just look now at how cops and railway officials came together in Uttar Pradesh's Ballia to actually save this train from the burning bogies to make sure that the entire train didn't catch fire. So there they are with that marathon effort which paid off.